Joining us today on Global View is a name synonymous with education reform and public service, a longtime Democrat, Paul Vallas. From leading some of America's largest school districts to running for mayor of Chicago, Paul brings decades of experience in tackling complex policy challenges with bold solutions. A seasoned leader, former CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and an outspoken voice on fiscal urban policy, Paul Vallas is here to share his insight on the future of education, governance, and leadership in today's America. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, as you know, Global View, it's an inclusive platform for confrontation ideological discourse that span from one side to the other of politics in America. I was very much impressed with your mayoral campaign in 2023, where you centered very important issues, including safety and education reform. Now, looking back, how do you think this campaign impacted the political discourse in Chicago and overall in Illinois?
Well, Chicago is a very, 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 very blue city. In fact, I say it's the bluest city east of San Francisco. So a lot of times there is this tendency to not have the type of debate and to not have the type of give and take that you might have where you have two strong parties as opposed to one. The Democrats have run the city of Chicago for, 5, 6, 7 decades. And of course, the Democrats, because of the legislative map, have literally a veto-proof control over the House and Senate. So there has not been a lot of discourse. There isn't that loyal opposition. There isn't kind of that check and balance, and it's definitely been that way in Chicago. But I think what's happened in recent years is factions have emerged. And look, I'm a candidate who ran against really the establishment. The political machine in the city of Chicago is really the Chicago Teachers Union and their allies. They are the dominant political machine. They are the bank. They put the boots on the ground, so to speak. And I think the fact that I was able to come so close, I got 48.5% of the vote. I think was suggested that issue-oriented candidates can make progress in even in a environment in which one party is dominating. And I think that was a sign of the times. And I think my issues on public safety, my issues on expanded school choice, my issues on approaching government and supporting governmental policies that don't create dependence, but rather give people the investments they need to become independent. I think that resonated, and this is why I came as close as I did. I went from 4% in the polls to being the leading candidate in the primary. Of course, you have to have 50% of the vote to win in the primary. So we had the runoff, and then I came very, very close. But I think that was a healthy sign for the city, and I look forward to the next race and to see, which I believe is going to be competitive. Not that I'm planning on running myself, but I really think there's a
real. Why not? If I can interrupt you, why not? You might know exactly what Chicago needs right now.
Well, I'm hoping that a candidate emerges that first of all has a vision for what needs to be done, has the courage to implement that vision, and has the skills to assemble a team that can help that person accomplish that. And that's what I'm looking for. I mean, the issues facing the city are clear. The issues of public safety, the issues of quality schools, the issues of investing in the community. So you create, local ownership. So you're creating a type of investments that are going to realize a return, and you're just not, increasing the number of governmental dependence, as has been the policy and has been the approach that the Democrats have taken in Chicago for many decades. I think that is what's needed in the city, and that is what's missing. And so I'm looking for a candidate that's going to advance those issues and have the courage to take on the establishment, particularly the Chicago Teachers Union and their allies, to make sure that we're implementing policies that are really going to empower the community and give the community real ownership.
Paul, you're a lifelong Democrat. You've been part of government in Chicago for a very long time. You're a very well-known name locally, especially politically. Why do you think that the Democrat establishment did not support your candidacy the way that you hoped or might have believed that they would have, given your very common sense proposals that you just laid out here, your policy-oriented platform that you ran on? What was it about your candidacy that threatened, do you believe, their interests, if you will, if that's even the right word to use?
Yeah, well, what's happened in Chicago is the traditional Democratic machine has really been replaced by the Chicago Teachers Union and their allies, the SEIU, and the majority of the unions actually supported my candidacy. But the Chicago Teachers Union, and really what happened in Chicago has actually happened in other cities too, like New York and elsewhere. Around 2010, 2011, the teacher unions nationally began to realize that if they were going to head off this push for more charter schools and more school choice and more accountability and school reform, that the Clinton and then followed by Bush and Obama administration were embracing that they would need allies. So they began to fund these far left organizations. So what you've seen in many cities like Chicago, and LA and New York is that the teacher unions became political organizations, and they began to align themselves with many of these progressive groups, many of these far left groups. In fact, if you look at the funding that went to some of these activist groups after the George Floyd tragedy, who supported Black Lives Matter, who supported some of these far left socialist organizations, it was the Chicago Teachers Union, the anti-cop groups, the Chicago Teachers Union. So the unions became radicalized. My mother used to say, who you hang around with, you become more like. So as the unions sought allies so that they could protect their interests, so that they could block and oppose school choice, so they could block the move towards greater accountability, greater demands that schools improve, or that they be closed and reconstituted. They allied themselves with these far left organizations, and they became, in many ways, infiltrated by those organizations themselves. So they became more radicalized, and that's what you have right now. So the Chicago Teachers Union is really a political party, and educating kids is secondary to their mission, and which is why they've taken a stand on so many issues totally unrelated to education. If there are characteristics of this movement, is number one, it's anti-cop. Number two, it's anti-Israel. Number three, it's anti-American. Everybody's a victim. And you see it. They've been as active pushing the sanctuary city policies and seeing illegal migration as a vehicle, to restore the city's population. Because the city of Chicago, like the state of Illinois, has seen a huge exodus of population because of high taxes, because of high crime, because of poor schools. So they become radicalized, and they're advancing a much broader agenda that has nothing to do with the education of children.
Well, education is definitely one of the topics that raise attention nationwide, and you're an expert in this field. Now, from my European perspective, as an Italian born and raised individual, I have my own opinion about the national education system in the United States, and I think it could be qualified as rather discriminatory for many reasons. Would you agree with that? And what is your outlook in the education system in America overall?
Well, I think the current education system public education system, really K-12, has been a failure for too many kids. In Chicago, we really have, and I want to use this word directly, we have an apartheid school system. If you are a low-income family, and your children attend the Chicago public schools, and the overwhelming vast majority of children who attend Chicago public schools are low-income, and the overwhelming vast majority of those low-income families are Black and Latino, then you literally are likely to be relegated to an underperforming or failing school with no options, with no alternatives. What the teachers union has done is they've made it almost impossible to make changes in schools that improve the schools if it impacts their members. If it impacts their members' salaries, their compensation, their workload, their job security, they oppose those changes. So neighborhood schools are failing because you cannot make changes in those neighborhood schools to make them better, because the elected local school councils cannot pick a better school model if the schools are academically failing. So here you have a school system that's abandoning standards, that's restoring social promotion, that prevents the principals and their local school councils who selected them from improving the school models if it impacts the teaching union members. So here you have them blocking improving local schools, while at the same time denying these very same families educational alternatives, school choice. They lobbied to get rid of the state-funded Invest in Kids scholarship program, which provided 15,000 families, mostly low-income minority families, with scholarships to attend private schools. And they're trying to destroy public charter schools. Public charter schools educate 54,000 kids in Chicago. 98% are Black and Latino, and they're underfunding them. They won't let them use public buildings. They're trying to stifle their creativity. And they're also trying to end the magnet school program, which, again, the majority of children who attend magnet schools are Black and Latino children. So on the one hand, they are preventing communities from demanding better school models and local school improvements, while at the same time denying those very same children, particularly if they don't have the financial means, denying them the opportunity to go to a better school, whether it's a charter school or a magnet school, or for that matter, a private school. The irony of this all is about 40% of the Chicago Teachers Union teachers who have children actually send their kids to private schools. In fact, Stacey Davis Gates, the president, one of her children go to a private school. So at the end of the day, it's okay for them to send their kids to private school, but poor families are going to be denied the financial resources to pick alternatives, private school alternatives to their failing schools. And that's the fundamental problem with the system. So the children, particularly poor families and overwhelmingly poor Black and Latino families, they're like hostages. They're prisoners in these schools. It's education redlining. The quality of their school is determined by their zip code or their income. It's an apartheid school system, and that's what we have. And I think it's working to the detriment of poor children. And it's why, after 50 years, it's been 50 years since the U.S. Department of Education was created. Over those 50 years, not only has student achievement not improved, but the achievement gap among children, among Black children, Latino children, white children, has not narrowed. Nothing's been accomplished in 50 years.
Well, you mentioned the Department of Education. That was actually going to be the segue into my next question. The President Trump and his administration wants to basically abolish or dismantle the Department of Education and actually allow parents to have more options, the way that you basically relayed is in the interest of the children vis-a-vis the state or funds coming from Washington, D.C. Do you think that's a good idea? If yes, why? And if not, why not?
Well, look, the U.S. Department of Education is 50 years old, and when it was proposed, the biggest opponents to the U.S. Department of Education was Albert Shanker, the legendary president of the National Federation of the New York Federation of Teachers, and of course Joe Califano, I think Joe first name, who was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and they thought it was a big mistake. They thought it would actually hurt public education because you had to have the federal government interfering with public education, and that's what in fact has happened. Let me just say this. When Trump was talking about getting rid of the Department of Education, he wasn't talking about getting rid of the programs that are funneled through the Department of Education. So those programs, whether it's the college loan program or whether the Title I, the poverty, the special education funded programs, et cetera, those programs can easily be offloaded to other agencies, like other agencies administered those programs 50 years ago. They were talking about getting rid of the bureaucracy, because the U.S. Department of Education under successive presidents has adversely interfered with local schools. During the Bush administration, for example, they mandated that like 20% of our Title I money all go to these pre-selected private providers to provide like tutoring services and things like that. It was very, very controversial, and it was resisted by many school districts. During the Obama administration, they literally tried to leverage the power of the U.S. Department of Education to develop a standardized curriculum and standardized testing, giving contracts to companies that have been like pre-selected and pre-qualified. You know what I mean? And then and then during the Biden administration, the teacher unions dominated the Biden administration, and they were imposing all sorts of mandates through the Biden administration on local school districts. And during COVID, they deliberately shortchanged private schools in allocating federal funds. Private schools during Trump's first administration got their per capita share of the COVID monies. 10% are educated in private schools. They got 10% of the money. During the Biden administration, they only got 2% of the money. And even that money came with strings attached. So the U.S. Department of Education has not played a constructive role. In fact, they've interfered. They have interfered in the management and operations of local schools. So I like the idea. I actually said that if you really fear the Trump administration, then you want to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education, because the Trump appointees are going to use the Department of Education to advance their agenda. Incidentally, their school choice agenda, which I 100%, 1,000% support. So at the end of the day, the Department of Education is like your appendix. I mean, what the hell does it do to help with your what contribution does it make? You know what I mean? And occasionally, depending on the president, you get appendicitis. So at the end of the day, this is about getting rid of this bureaucracy that has been finding opportunities under successive presidents to interfere with what should be a state and local decision making, since over 90% of the money spent on schools comes from the state and locals.
Well, it's really refreshing listening to you because it's always a moment in which you realize that there is a common ground between this polarized world of Republicans and Democrats, right? And this middle ground is called common sense. And I think we're all meeting at this point, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. I come myself from a family of educators in Italy, and I believe education is really the rock bottom of society. And it's so important to address this issue. But one of other topic you addressed during your campaign was public safety, which seems to be a major issue in Chicago right now. You also criticized the current mayor, Johnson, saying that rhetoric doesn't match facts, action. So what is missing? What is happening in Chicago right now that made of Chicago kind of a symbol of far west, almost all over the United States?
Well, I think that the problem with Chicago on the public safety side is really and it's not just the mayor. In Cook County in particular, it's really county government. Tony Preckwill has been county board president and Democratic Party boss for 15 years, and they've really advanced this public safety agenda that really treats criminals like victims, and unfortunately, many times police like criminals themselves. And so what you've seen is they've embraced this concept of pretrial release, which in effect, releases most people who have been arrested. Well over 70% of those arrested for violent crimes, they're actually released on either bail, or for that matter, no bail, or sometimes they're put on ankle bracelets and things like that. But it's this idea that, somehow criminals are victims, somehow they're the victims of their circumstance, and this pretrial release program has really left the community unprotected. There in Chicago's in the last 4 years, there's been almost 400 individuals who have been murdered or shot by individuals who are out on pretrial release for other felonies, and that number is probably 4 to 5 times as high because that 400 only reflects those arrested, and those murdered and shot. The percentage of those murders and shot who have been arrested combined is like less than 20%. So that 400 number may be as high as 1,600 or maybe as close to 2,000. So the problem here is it's just this. Look, you need real prison reform. When individuals are arrested for nonviolent offenses, I think like they do with drug rehab, requiring that they participate in education, occupational training programs as an alternative to incarceration, or to have their charges postponed. I think it's an effective approach to take. You need reentry programs for individuals who have been arrested, who have been in prison, so that when they're returned, they have the skills to find jobs and things like that. I'm a strong advocate for real reform, but decriminalizing offenses that are serious and releasing individuals who are dangerous, not only individuals who have been arrested for committing and charged with dangerous felonies, but also individuals who are habitual criminals, sending them right back to the street, I think as having catastrophic consequences. And the greatest consequences are being felt by poor communities, and in Chicago, overwhelmingly Black and Latino communities. So much for this agenda. I mean, we have a mayor who plays the race card at every turn, yet he's denying poor Black families educational choice. He's denying poor Black families the type of police presence in their community so that their 911 calls can be responded to. In Chicago, half the 911 calls are not responded to in a timely manner because there's no officer available when the calls come in because they have officer shortages. The Chicago Transit Authority has as many officers assigned as the mayor's security detail. This massive transit authority, it literally has no police officers walking the train platforms or standing outside the train stations, plummeting. The transit ridership has plummeted by about a third since COVID, in large part because people are afraid to take public transportation. So clearly, there are easy solutions. You can balance criminal justice reform with a strong police presence and holding violent criminals and habitual criminals accountable, having real accountability for the offenses that they've committed. There's a balance. And it's the same thing on the education side. Why can't poor families have choices? Why can't poor families whose children are attending chronically failing schools have an opportunity to send their child to either a supported charter school or, for that matter, a private school? I mean, the Archdiocese, the Catholic schools do a superb job educating inner city poor Black and Latino children. They should have those options. This is not rocket science.
Absolutely.
Paul, I also think that people should have the option to have a life of prosperity in the United States. And Chicago was a once great American city. It still is the third largest city in America, but it's in an incredibly dangerous fiscal situation right now. You talked about the security situation. If you look around the world, from cities like Dubai or other cities that are fast growing, have incredibly high per capita GDPs, they have one thing in common, that is safety. They prioritize the safety of their citizens, and then that attracts foreign capital or domestic business, and that creates jobs. And then you have a stable tax regulatory authority, and that creates jobs and prosperity. Chicago seems to have none of the above. So what does Chicago have to do to prevent itself from going the way of Detroit just this past decade, and instead go towards a Dubai or even a Miami here in the United States, where you are seeing taxes cut, but businesses leaving Chicago and coming to Miami and other places like that? What does Chicago have to do to get back on track and to become a prosperous city? I guess that's the million-dollar question everybody wants more expertise on.
Well, good. Let's see if I can answer that in 5 minutes. Look, I mean, Illinois has lost 1.6 million residents since over the last 20 years, third only to California and New York with the exodus. Chicago has its lowest population in 100 years. The biggest exodus the last 20 years has been Black families overwhelmingly middle-income families with children. What does that tell you? The issues are here. It's taxes, the issues are crime, and the issues are school choice. And I've articulated both during the campaign and my numerous post-election writings. I've done over 100 op-ed pieces and a number of publications about what the pathway is. But let me try to give you the quick cliff notes. On public safety, the $300 million that we spent on police overtime, if you can believe it, because of police shortages, could easily hire the 1,700, 1,800 additional police officers that will be needed to make sure that you have community policing in every community, police officers who are known to the community and who in turn know the community. And so that when you ride public transportation in Chicago, there is a police presence on the platform and at the station, simple as that. And you can create a pipeline to recruit the next generation of police officers from the communities themselves through the military academy programs, which I opened up, the high school military academy and ROTC programs in Chicago and things like that. There's a pathway to really have a responsive, effective police force. On the school side, there's no alternative. School choice should be a constitutional right. And this is a school district that spends $30,000 per student, and only 54% of that money actually finds its way into the classroom. So reprogramming how that money is spent, then dismantling the massive central office that skims so much money off the top, pushing the money down to the local schools and giving the principals in the community the autonomy to pick better school models if their schools are failing, while at the same time putting money into the private school scholarship program. So if poor families want to send their kids to find alternatives to their neighborhood schools, they have the right to do that. That is eminently possible. It's not a financial issue. It's a political issue. And you've got to be prepared to take on the Chicago Teachers Union leadership to make that happen. And then finally, on the budget side, the schools consume 56% of all the property taxes, in addition to getting about $1 billion more in direct subsidies from the city. They're spending $30,000 per student. They have one employee for every 7.5 students, and 22,000 of their employees are not teachers. If there is a pathway to balance, to addressing the city's financial crises, it really lies through the school. It lies through taking this massive budget, radically decentralizing it, pushing the money down to the local schools and the autonomy to spend that money at the local level in ways that can be most effective. And then allow the city to begin to shift these massive subsidies that they've been providing the district to addressing the city's own financial needs. So there's a pathway to solving those problems. And the city's going to need a mayor who understands that there are clear solutions. These problems are clearly solvable if you have an individual who knows what those solutions are, has the willingness to take on the Chicago Teachers Union, who I believe is the biggest obstacle to the city, to improving the quality of life in the city, and the biggest danger to the future of the city. And that we also have a mayor who knows how to assemble a team that can get the job done. So I'm optimistic about the city's future, but the key to the city's future lies in the politics and getting the right leadership in place, because the resources and the means and the tools are there. And what I've literally tried to do, not just since the election, but over the last 5 or 6 years, is to articulate again and again and again the pathways for getting the city back on track. And what I'm going to do is work with people who supported me in the last election to try to find that candidate for mayor, and those candidates for the city council, and those candidates for the county board, the critical county board positions like county board president, who has so much control over the criminal justice system. Our goal is to find the leadership that will have the courage to do what needs to be done.
Thank you, Paul. And I think on this note, we can all look forward to 2027 and see what the city of Chicago unfold and present as candidate for a better future for the city. In the meantime, where people can find you?
Well, you can read I write for the Illinois Policy Institute. Just Google Illinois Policy Institute and Vallas, and all my pieces come up. I also write regularly for the Chicago Tribune. Again, if you Google Chicago Tribune Vallas, you can pick the subject, whether it's public safety or it's education. And I also write for a Chicago publication called the Chicago Contrarian. It's a wonderful publication, and I have a really kind of an issue policy piece in a week. If you Google the Chicago Contrarian, once again, it has all of my articles and the other articles that I think are of importance and make for a good read.
Paul, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We're looking forward to seeing Chicago become that once again great city, and with your help and with these type of common sense policy proposals, I think it will be. So thank you once again for joining Global View.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.